not that really matters, I don't think. All right, we are live. All right, so we're going to pick up in chapter 23. First aorist active, middle, indicative verbs. So I mentioned before we started recording the future and the aorist middle, or excuse me, passive verbs will come in the next chapter, as there's a different tense formative that's used for those, as opposed to in the future we have the sigma tense formative, and now we have the first aorist, and we'll see the sigma alpha tense formative. Tense formative, every in English and in Greek, they have prefixes, suffixes, infixes. These tense formatives are infixes. They're inserted within the word, and they give us the form to show what tense is being applied. The future with the sigma tense formative, and sigma alpha is what we see today. So first aorist, middle, indicative. Let's do a little quick review. In English, you guys are familiar. We have what's referred to, grammarians refer to as regular or weak, sometimes called verbs, where we form the past by adding ed or a d if there's a vowel at the end. And so we would say, study versus studied, walk versus walked, those kind of things. So that's the regular form. And the irregular one, or also called strong, I'm not sure why. I think it has to do with strong because it has to do with the stem. The stem doesn't change. Or for irregular, the stem changes for the past tense. So it's strong in that the stem doesn't allow modification. I'm not real sure. I didn't really study that, but I'm trying to just surmise why that is. Why it's called strong for irregular. I would think it'd be the opposite, but it's not. So the irregular in English, we eat versus ate, we swim versus swam, we ran versus run, those kind of things. And so we actually use a different stem. That was the second aorist that we looked at. Now, those are the forms. That's what it looks like. Okay, we're talking about what it looks like, not how it's translated. The translation of it's going to be the same regardless of what form you have. An aorist is an aorist, whether it's first or second, it's still an aorist. Translation is going to be the same, regardless if it's a first or second aorist.
Hey, Dave.
And yeah, go ahead.
That's one I didn't get on the test. It asked the difference between a weak and a strong verb, but I couldn't find it in the book. I assumed it was regular and irregular, but I didn't know, so I just left it.
Yeah, I think it's in the book.
It's
I know it's on chapter 23 on page 251, and I think it's also on page.
Let me get 22.
Yeah, on page 241.
241.
If you look at no, it's on. If you look at
regular and irregular, but if you look at what were you going to say, Samuel?
It's on 240. If you look at regular and irregular, the footnotes are also called weak and strong.
Oh, okay, there you go. It's in the all right.
Yeah. Hey, listen, I read and underline these footnotes because they bring out a lot of cool information. So it's well worth the time.
And you're saying the difference between weak and strong is the ed?
Yeah, the weak is the ed. The strong is when it changes the stem itself.
Right.
Oh, okay. All right.
Which seems counterintuitive to me. It seemed like it'd be the opposite, but that's not what it is. Regular is weak. So walk to walked, love to loved. Those are weak or regular verbs. I'm not sure why. I know there's a reason. I just haven't looked it up. And irregular are strong verbs that would be run to ran, swim to swum, that kind of thing, where you actually change the stem. Anyway, one day I'll actually look it up, but it hasn't been so important that it bothered me enough. I haven't lost any sleep yet on that. So.
Maybe you will soon.
Yeah, I probably will now that I put it on recording and I'm kind of talked about what I don't know. All right. So as we've talked about many times, we have personal endings that we're going to use. We have the primary endings and the secondary endings. Primary endings are associated with the present tense, the future tense, and the perfect. We'll get to the perfect in about, not next week, but the week after. So 2 weeks, I think. The secondary tenses are associated with the imperfect and the aorist. And as you might notice, and we've talked about before, they always have the augment to it. So we see the augment with the epsilon, whether you're talking about an imperfect or an aorist. So you're talking about the active voice, they're highlighting the red. and the passive voice highlighted in the blue for first, second, third, singular, and plural in both cases. So nothing new. You just a quick review. And so second aorist, active indicative, has the augment. There's our epsilon augment right there. And we're going to use the aorist active tense stem. And this is, in this case, is different than the present tense stem for the present. This is the present. And it's different for it. Well, remember we said the present tense stem is really the kind of abnormal, irregular one. Oftentimes it has an addition or changes to it, and but the regular is really here at the second aorist. So the lob, and so we have our augment, our aorist active tense stem, our connecting vowels, nothing new, and then the secondary personal endings, just like we've seen before, right? And so we get, if we use our verb lambano, now we don't use luo here because luo is not going to be a second aorist. Luo for aorist is going to be a first aorist. You'll see why in a minute. So we have to use a different word. So we use lambano. And lambano, elabano, so we get in the first person singular, elaban, second singular, second person singular, elabes, third, elaben. Now notice, well, no, it's different, never mind. And then the plural on the first person, elabamen, and then elabaete and elaban. And notice that this and this are the same. You'll have to look at context to where they're talking about a plural, they versus a singular I. Normally, you don't have too much trouble with that. And but second aorists do not have a tense formative. The only way we know the difference between the second aorist is the tense stem versus the imperfect, because the imperfect also has that epsilon augment, but it's going to use the present tense stem. And so we'll have, everything else will be the same. And that's the only way you really know the difference between a imperfect.
That's why when you learned it, you learned the first aorist first because it started with the present tense stem. Remember you said that you kind of wish that you started with second aorist whenever you were learning this for the first time.
Yeah, I can't remember which order they taught it when I learned it, but I'd like this order. Mouse's book uses this order because you go from the imperfect to the second aorist, and they're exactly the same except for the stem. So you're only, and I realize you're not going to always, and Mouse recommends you learn the roots and the stem, and that really should be done. I don't. Some of them I recognize, they're just so common, and Lambano is going to be one. They're just so common. So it's not generally a big problem. The epsilon is always a flag for you, always. It could be a word that starts with an epsilon, but if you know the root word, if you know the word itself, and it starts with an epsilon, well, then if it was going to be augmented, then that epsilon would be what? Eta. It'd be lengthened, right? So you would see the difference. It'd be eta for the aorist and for the imperfect. So you would see the difference. And generally speaking, you won't have too much trouble between the imperfect and the second aorist. Your first thought is going to be imperfect. That's almost always. But then when you look at it, you say, wait a minute, that's not quite right. And you begin to figure that out, put the puzzle together. And really the key is can you understand the difference between them, even if you don't always recognize it? Because you're going to use your computer, hover over it with your mouse and go, oh, that's an aorist. That's not going to say second aorist. It's not going to say first aorist. And you're going to wonder, where's your sigma alpha tense formative? Well, if you remember, second aorist doesn't have a tense formative sigma alpha. And it very much like the imperfect, except it uses a different tense stem here. That's the only real difference here. Okay? Did I really confuse you?
Yeah, those tense stems, I had difficulty on like the test for that, of doing the tense stems of figuring out what the aorist one is. I read over the chapter again, and I really couldn't quite understand. Like I get what the tense stem is, but I couldn't find many of them.
Yeah,
for the aorist
it
side of
can
it.
be a challenge when you're working with paper. Computer makes life so much easier, but the whole point is that you recognize and understand that there is a difference between a present tense stem, an aorist tense stem, although they may be the same. Okay, I mean, oftentimes they'll really be the same tense stem, but it's treated differently for an aorist versus if it's a second aorist, especially. We'll get more into that, but.
Okay.
All right, and so this is what we did last week. I know how much y'all loved it, and then we did the middle, same exact thing. The only difference is now we are going to use the middle passive personal endings, and we use here the genomai word I became because it just works, I guess. So we get egenomain, egenu, egeneto, egenometha, egenesta, and egenota. It's the same thing. We haven't done anything different, so you just got to know these endings right here. All right, so that moves us forward into the first aorist now. And I think you'll find these much more recognizable, less ambiguity. We're worrying about, I mean, it's still going to use the aorist tense stem versus the present, but you're not even going to notice because you're going to see the sigma alpha, and that's going to make the difference. The meaning for the first aorist is really the same as the second. There's nothing different in how we translate it. It's just the form, like walked versus ran, run versus ran, walked versus walked. I mean, just the form is different. That's all. And it's going to be put in the past tense generally. Normally, time has passed. Its aspect is, we had this long discussion, undefined or perfective, in that we're looking at the completed whole. It's undefined in its internal aspect. And yes, Jake, there's no doubt that in most cases, and I'm going to go a little deeper today after we get through this, if we get time. Yes, in most cases, there are the actual event may have actually some definition or event. Somebody was crying or walked or something like that. But whatever reason, the author only tells us to tell us that the event occurred and nothing more. In the first aorist, the biggest difference is we're going to use this tense-formative sigma alpha. In the future, we use the sigma. Now we're going to use a sigma alpha, and that's the biggest difference. We're going to continue with the aorist tense stem, and oftentimes here it is the same as the present tense stem in the root. So in the second aorist, these were different, but here they're not different, they're the same. And generally, not every single time, but in
Wait,
most.
the stem equals the root?
Well, a lot of times the present. Well, okay, let's do luo. Excuse me. Lu is the root. Lu is the stem, and it is the present tense stem, and is also the aorist, the first aorist tense stem. So yeah, they're the same here. Okay, not in every case, but oftentimes they are. Um, you know, sometimes you'll have a stem. I'm trying to think of a word. I'm just going to do. You have a stem, and then you have a root, but then you add something to make the stem. That's not always the case. Sometimes they're the same, where y is the root. So basically, the aorist tense stem and the present tense stem are often going to be the same for a first aorist, where in the second aorist, they're not. That's the big difference. That's how you know the difference. Because the imperfect uses the present tense stem. But
Right. I
so,
get. I guess in my mind, I was thinking it's always going to equal the root, but it's just sometimes.
yeah, there'll be occasions when they're not the stem and the root are not the same.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, there might be one letter. You might add a letter for the stem, okay? Because the root. Think of a word with a root, and you basically modify that or add to it, maybe add to it to get different words.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I'll show you something in a minute. When we go to logos, when we get there, I'll show you that in a minute. You could see, you've seen it. Basically, you look up a word study and you see the root of the word and you see how many different words come from that root.
Mm-hmm.
Well, sometimes the root and the stem is exactly the same. Sometimes you add more to it and you get a different stem. So it just varies.
Right.
So, but here's the key: present tense for the first aorist are generally the same. Okay. Versus for the second aorist, they're not. That make you guys okay with that? Doesn't really matter if you're okay.
Whenever we come to something in Greek that's like okay generally, but not always, it just throws me for a loop. So I'll just have
Well,
to.
welcome to language. It's the same in English. I don't know what you're complaining about. English
No,
is the
I
same
just don't
thing.
understand.
There's nothing that's constant. There's always exceptions. There's always variables. So it's just the same everywhere.
Yeah,
You know?
I guess the equals is, I think if they're always there, I don't.
All right, let me do it this way then. I'll do it this way. You know what that symbol means? Approximately. Approximately equals. I don't know if I drew it right, but
You're muted, Jake, if you're talking.
Well, I've spent too much time with this. I don't know.
Jake, you're muted.
I've been muted this whole time. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I've been.
Jake, you're muted.
I was saying.
I don't know.
No, we're on the same page, Dave. I like the little blip there. That helps.
Yeah, it's approximately equals is what it is.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm with you.
All right. Okay, so there we go. So first aorist, how do we recognize the first aorist? Well, we have the augment, right? We've already seen that before. That's nothing new. We're going to use the same aorist active tense stem. Only this time it's going to be pretty much the same as the present tense stem. Now we're going to add this tense formative, the sigma alpha, and then we're going to use the secondary active personal endings that we've been using on the secondary active personal endings. And so there's our lu, our stem, which is the same as the root. There's our epsilon for our augment, our sigma alpha, our personal ending. And notice there's no connecting vowel. Why is there no connecting vowel? Anybody know? Think of the term, the word connecting vowel.
What is it? A consonant?
No connecting vowel. Why is there no connecting vowel?
You're putting emphasis on the connecting. So,
Does it have something to do with the sigma being there? Because sigmas are always different.
Not the sigma, but keep going.
The
alpha.
the alpha beside it?
Is the alpha not a vowel? So this serves, basically, you don't need a connecting vowel because
Okay.
right, what you don't want is a sigma min, right? That's why you have connecting vowels, the omicron or the epsilon, is because you're trying to pronounce things, but you don't need it with the sigma alpha. So there's no connecting vowel. So just highlight that. It's not a big deal. We're not going to freak out over it. It's just not there. So, but we did add a tense formative, and because of the alpha ending of it, we don't really need a connecting vowel. So it's already connected, in other words, with a vowel. As a matter of fact, some scholars think that is the connecting vowel, but most, if you read Smythe's commentary on this stuff, it's not, and I agree with him. It's not really appropriate. Anyway, so here's what we get. I love this one of my favorite charts. We get our augment, we get our stem, right? In this case, it's the aorist active tense stem, which happens to be the same as the present. We add our tense formative, the sigma alpha, and then we add our personal endings. Again, no connecting vowel, right? So there's no connecting vowel here. That chart is gone. First person with the tense formative. Now, there is no ending for the first person singular, and that is unusual. Let me point out this little highlight. This highlight is that the connecting vowel is dropped because the tense formative ends in a vowel, right? So we already said that. Now, this double here, the first aorist, first person singular, differs from the normal pattern of the new ending. Normally, we'd have the new ending there, but the first person singular in the first aorist won't have it. And so you just end with the saw, with the tense formative. So elu saw. And I mean, automatically I know this is an aorist because of the saw. Automatically I know it's the first aorist because of the saw. Because second aorist, first aorist, because the second aorist won't have the tense formative. Automatically I know it's an aorist, not an imperfect, because of the saw. I mean, it is such a flag. It becomes so simple and so recognizable. It just makes life so much easier. These areas are really easy to recognize, easy to translate, where second areas might be a little more difficult, as you guys have already highlighted, because I don't really know the stem change here. Well, you may not, right? So it's not as easy to make recognition to put the puzzle together with a second aorist. Much easier with a first aorist. So we follow the same endings here: the sigma, the new, or the nothing, the new, the min, the ted, the new. Just like we've seen before. And so we get elusa, elusas, eluse, elusamin, elusaete, elusan. And really, there's nothing more to this than that. That makes sense, you guys? Can you see it? You're okay?
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
All right, good.
First aorist active has a tense formative. The second aorist active has a connecting vowel.
Yes. Yeah. That's a good way to look at it. The second aorist will have a connecting vowel because you need a vowel to connect these consonants so you can pronounce it, right? And protect, to connect the stem with the personal ending so you can make a pronunciation. Sometimes those connecting vowels and the stem ending will conflate or will merge or will change. That's just contraction, normal. We do it in English, we do it in Greek, we do it in Spanish. It's not unusual.
I think I did on my test for the tense. I put the second aorist active indicative.
Right.
No, wait. Is that what I'm? Sorry, I had something in my mind and I forgot it.
Yeah, I do that all the time. It's a sign of aging.
So I'll ask this. I think you've already answered it. So the aorist active tense stem, is that going to be the same in both aorists?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it's the same for whether you're talking about a first or second aorist. Now, keep in mind, a first aorist will use an aorist active tense stem, but it's that word is not going to be in a second aorist form. Or second aorist, we use an aorist active tense stem, but that word or that stem cannot be in a first. It's one or the other. In other words, like you can't do walked and ran and make them the same tense stem. They're different. They're different words. So yes, they're using aorist active tense stem, but one's just going to be first aorist, where it's going to be the irregular, and the
Okay.
first aorist is going to be the regular, and the second aorist will be the irregular thing. So, but yeah, it is the aorist active tense stem, right?
Okay.
Okay.
Cool.
All right, so then we have our liquid aorist. Let's not forget about that, right? The liquid aorist ends in a what? Remember, the tense stem ends in a what? What are the four letters? Y'all tell me. I'll write down what you tell me.
Oh, the labial things. The
liquid, right? There's four letters.
I think lambda's one.
No. You're close though. It is close to lambda. Keep going.
Rho.
No. Rho is definitely one of them. Yeah.
Okay, rho. Back up. I got rho. Sam, you're muted, by the way. And then I saw your mouth moving. Maybe you were just sorry. New.
Yes, that's one of them.
It is. Oh man. Okay.
Actually, lambda is one of my apologies. You're right.
Oh wow. So I'm 3 for 3.
Lambda, mu, nu, and rho. right?
The mu is 1, 2. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Just think of the alphabet: lambda, mu, nu, and is rho after the nu?
Omicron. No.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's a vowel though, so that's why. So, but
Yeah.
yeah, you
Yeah.
just go in that order pretty much. So, yeah. So anyway, when you get to a stem, it's an aorist active tense stem that ends in a lambda, mu, nu, or rho. Then you don't use the sigma alpha. Instead, you use just the alpha. So that is also a tense formative, but it will not have the sigma there. It will only have the alpha. We'll still use our secondary active ending. So far in aorist, the second aorist has no tense formative, like you mentioned, Jake. It used the connecting vowel. The first aorist will use the sigma alpha the vast majority of the times, but when a aorist active tense stem ends in a liquid, a lambda mu nu rho, it won't use the sigma. It'll use just the alpha. So you can have a sigma alpha or an alpha. Okay? And so we get main plus the alpha, no sigma, plus the min. And so we get menamin. Now I want you to notice something. We haven't got this yet. That is the same for the present tense. Its actual root, by the way, is min. I think I'm going to memory. I'm pretty sure it's right. That's the root. And but the present is going to be main, which is going to be the same as the aorist, or at least the first aorist. Well, anyway, so this aorist active for this word pretty much is the same as the present tense stem, which is pretty much the same as the imperfect, right? But because it's the same, we have to have the alpha or the sigma alpha to differentiate. Where in the first aorist we don't have to because it uses a different stem. There's a reason behind this. Not that I know it all or understand it all, but that's the reason. Okay, we're all right. All right, a little more about that. Hold on a minute. There we go. All right. Yeah. So again, with our first aorist active indicative, we're going to use our augment. We're going to use our aorist active tense stem, and when it's a liquid ending, we use the alpha, not the sigma alpha, plus the same secondary endings. That's it. And I didn't have. I didn't. This is not well. Luo is not. The reason is Luo is not a doesn't end in a mu lambda mu nu or rho. So this is really not applicable to the liquid stuff. No. Okay, but these are. So we have our argument, which is the epsilon. We have our aorist tense stem plus the tense formative for the alpha when we're dealing with a liquid, lambda mu nu rho, and our secondary active personal endings. So here's our root r plus the alpha, not the sigma alpha, because that's a rho. And so we get I rho. That is the same that I, notice the root, it adds the iota. That's what the present does. Remember we said the present is really kind of irregular. And the first aorist is going to pretty much follow the present, as does the imperfect. That's why we add the alpha or the sigma alpha in order to differentiate it. And so we get, and what happens to this when we make it an aorist? We lengthen that diphthong and we get the a ra, with the smooth breathing and circumflex, a ra. So you see what happens there? I row, I raise up.
Yeah, with it lengthening, yeah.
Yeah. Something had to happen. Remember, we got to add our augment. So this diphthong is going to lengthen in order to adjust for the augment, the epsilon. So that's why that's that a ra. Now, when you see that, you're probably not even going to go, "What is a ra? I don't know that word." Yeah. You may not, and it might be a puzzle to figure it out, put it together, or you could just hover on it with your mouse and it'll tell you. And it's from the a row, I row, meaning I raise up. That's going to be the lexical form right there. So here you have apoc 10. That's our root, right? We have this apoc and then 10. And apoc, and so because we end in a noon, that is our liquid. We're going to add the alpha, not the sigma alpha, in order to form the aorist, first aorist. And so we get the apa. There's our apa. This is by the way the present form, present tense. There's our apa. There's our from. Tne no. There's our first person present. And notice what happens. There's our aorist, right? So that omicron here is going to drop, and we're going to add our aorist to the root right here. There's our root. And we get there. We're following the present tense stem with the epsilon iota, which is not part of the root. And we get our ena, apectena. It's really a logical flow. You may not memorize it or know it in all cases, but you could see what's happening. And it just takes sort of time to realize it. And you may not even recognize it when you're reading. You're going, what is a ra? Because it doesn't appear a lot. I don't think. I hadn't looked. But that's what's happening. And so when you kind of get stuck and you finally figure it out, you can go like, oh yeah, now I understand. And so this kind of help you out. Some other liquid Aorist actives. This is the first singular, second, third, and then first plural, second and third. And here's the aorist form. This is the where elusa, elusas, elusen, elusamen, elusaete, elusan. This would be our first aorist right here. Okay, just as an example to compare. And here is our liquid aorist with the noon ending, stem ending. And so we add the alpha, the alpha, the alpha. Here, this is the one place where that alpha transformative is actually changed to an epsilon. I really didn't look up why, the alpha and the alpha. So it's pretty consistent for the most part, but recognizing it might be a little difficult without that sigma. So just know that, oh, that's a nu, and I got an alpha there. Huh. I bet you that's a liquid aorist verb. So. All right, now middle is the exact same thing, okay? Exact same thing. We're going to have our tense form to sigma alpha. We're going to use the middle passive personal endings, right? So we get elusa main, elusa main. And so here's our augment, our tense stem, our tense formative, and then we're just using the other set of endings. If it happens to be a liquid stem ending with the lambda mu nu or rho ending, then we would use the alpha, not the sigma alpha. And so with the sigma alpha, we get our lusamain or lusamain, eluso, elusato, elusameta, elusaet, elusaste, elusanto. All right. Again, it's okay. I think that's enough. And so with that, I don't have this. Yeah. Okay. So we've done the present tense using the present tense stem with the connecting vowels, the primary endings, and the primary middle passive endings, right? We've done the imperfect using the same tense stem, except we added the augment. But our connecting vowel, we use the secondary endings because we're having the augment. And for the active and the middle passive endings, then we did the future, which was, of course, with the sigma, same connecting vowels using the primary active endings. We did the liquid futures, which is no big deal, except for the liquid stem ending. We add the epsilon sigma within our connecting vowel. And oftentimes what happens is that sigma will drop because it's intervocalic. And we use our primary active endings. Our future middle, same thing. We use the sigma with our connecting vowels, but we use the middle passive endings. Now we've done the second aorist, both the active and the middle. Again, the augments and the aorist active uh, stem ending. For the second aorist, there is no transformative, but we have our connecting valves. We use our secondary endings just like we did with the imperfect. Uh, for the second aorist middle, same thing. There's no transformative. We use our connecting valves and we use the secondary personal endings. Then we did the first aorist, right? First aorist uh, active. Again, we have our epsilon augment, sigma alpha, and if it's a liquid, lambda mu nu rho, we use the alpha, not the sigma. And we again use the secondary endings because of the augment. And then we get to the first aorist middle. It's the same thing with the augment, sigma alpha, the same as we did with before, except we're using the middle passive endings. That's it. That's what you've learned. That's a lot, but you see there's a pretty logical flow. What we're going to do next is we're going to do the same thing, except we're going to use a different transformative for the passive future and the passive aorist. We use different transformatives. And that'll be next week, so we won't get into it now. So, any thoughts or questions? I want to go over a couple more things if we get time. What time is it? Yeah, we got a few minutes.
Yeah, there was a lot there. I think I got the overview that you just showed there. It shows, which one uses the augment. They all use epsilon. It shows the differences in the transformative and the connecting vowel, which second and first.
Right.
So the liquid aorist is associated with the first aorist and not the second aorist. I want to ask that.
Well, yes. Now, okay. Let me clarify. So the difference is there's a you could have a stem. I think I don't even know for a fact. You could have a stem in a second aorist that ends in a liquid lambda mu nu rho, but there's no transformative, so it doesn't matter.
Can you say that one more time? I think I caught it, but I wanted to settle on
So
my.
you could have a second aorist stem that ends in a lambda mu nu rho, right? So
Right.
could it be a possibility? I don't know for a fact, but there's no transformative. So the reason we highlight the liquid aorist for both the first aorist for the first aorist has to do with the fact that there's a transformative, and that transformative will change. The reason we highlight for the future is again because we use a transformative, and that transformative changes because of the lambda mu nu rho. But there is no transformative for the second aorist, so it doesn't really matter if the stem ends in a lambda mu nu rho. You just have the connecting valve.
Okay. So I think I'm getting it. But I will say all the changes are very, very confusing from word to word. And it kind of goes back to I think what Sam was asking a little earlier about, figuring out what the aorist stems are. Because I had trouble on that. That's why I haven't sent my test in yet. I was trying to find it, but I couldn't.
That's all right. I don't have time to grade it right now anyway.
Okay.
So listen, look at it this way, okay? So you have a building block approach. You learn the present tense stem, and you learn the connecting vowels, and you learn the different personal endings, primary, and then you add it to that the imperfect, and you learn you add the future. But let's just stay with the imperfect. You have the same thing, but now you're using secondary endings because you have this augment. All right, you got that, no problem, no. Then you
Right.
have the future, all the exact same thing, except now we're going to add these transformatives. They're necessary for us to differentiate, especially when we do errors, to differentiate between to recognize that it's a future function. So all we did is we add this transformative for the future. Now we're using what's called a future active tense stem, but truthfully, and I could be way off on this. All right, I know Mouse says we should learn the tense stems, but I couldn't tell you the difference between a future active tense stem and an aorist active tense stem, except for the fact that if I recognize it's an aorist verb versus a future verb, then well, they must be using a future active tense stem. But other than that, I wouldn't know. Now, I guess some scholar, I'm not, might be able to differentiate. So I don't really care. Now, maybe I'm wrong because Mouse says you should learn these 10 stems. I didn't. And I recognize some because they're so drastically different. Erkamai and Elthan. Oh, well, Elthan occurs so common. I know that's the Aorist form of Erkamai. It's a completely different stem, but it's still Erkamai. Just a different stem for the Aorist form. So very logical changes here, okay? Very consistent changes to it. Now, when we get to the Aorist, we do the exact same thing, whether you're talking first or second Aorist. Let's just talk with first Aorist, right? Because what we're going to do is we're going to add these augments. Remember, first and second is just a different form. And but a first Aorist is going to follow. It's an Aorist active stem, and it's going to be the same as the present and the same as the imperfect. Just going to use it. It's going to be almost the same. Well, if it's the same, that makes it really difficult for me to differentiate between an imperfect and a first Aorist because they both have the augment. Because they're both going to use the secondary endings. So they have to have a different way to differentiate. So the sigma alpha or the alpha with a liquid ending is how they differentiate that. Same with the first Aorist middle, except we're going to use the secondary middle passive endings. Now, second Aorist can be definitely a little more confusing. It's going to build, its form is going to be built very much like the imperfect, augment, connecting vowel, and secondary middle endings. The only difference is it's going to use a different tense stem.
Yeah,
that's the only difference.
And the thing is, I'm pretty much with you there. It'll take some studying to get it all down, of course. But
and really, if you get that,
it's asking the question of when I'm trying to find the Aorist tense stem, am I doing backwards math, seeing how the tense formative forms into it, or is there something in the vocab in the book or something in the back that tells us? Because we could.
After you get past this point, you almost never really emphasize aorist tense stem versus present tense stem versus future tense stem. You'll emphasize the verb. It's an aorist verb. It's a future verb. It's a present verb. It's an imperfect verb. This is necessary for we can understand the difference between an imperfect and a second aorist, right?
Right.
I mean, we got to understand why, how to recognize, or at least understand that there is a difference between an imperfect. We know an imperfect's past. We know what aorist is past. The imperfect is past with we see it's past with the augment of the epsilon. That means we're going to use the secondary endings. The aorist also going to be past. It's also going to use the augment. But there are some aorists that are going to use their stem are going to be completely different form, like ran versus run versus swim versus swam, that kind of thing. And so hence they have to bring it out so you understand it exists. I struggle recognizing a second aorist, but the first thing that I recognize is this epsilon.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the first thing. But then I go, oh, there's no sigma alpha. That must be an imperfect. That's the first thing I do almost every single time. That's normal, I think. Or I'm abnormal and everybody else gets it.
And the augment.
But most words, look, that I know for a fact, lambano, because that's just a word that occurs so much. I receive, I take. Lambano has in the imperfect and the present is going to be a lambda, alpha, mu, okay, and that mu is missing. Oh, wait a minute. That must be a second aorist, not an imperfect, because the imperfect is going to use this form, whereas the aorist, second aorist, is going to use that form.
Yeah, the recognizing
the reason
it.
we keep on, go ahead, Jake.
I was going to say the recognizing it that's difficult, but I'm starting to get it. I'm starting to. There's still some words in the parsing I couldn't find
Well,
my question.
You're not alone, brother. We're all there, unless you just spend a lot of time with this. That will always be a struggle.
Mm-hmm.
The reason we keep on bringing this up is because, like, we just on the test itself, it's asking for the aorist tense stem, and so just trying to figure that side of it out is like.
Well, that if you're dealing with a second aorist, it's not going to be the same as the present, right?
Yeah.
Okay. If you're dealing with now that you had this today, if you're dealing with a second aorist or first aorist, excuse me, it will be most likely the same as the present.
Yeah, just
And
like
that's why it
Lou.
adds an augment to it, so you could differentiate it between the imperfect. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to
Yeah.
differentiate. The way to differentiate between the second aorist and the imperfect is going to be because it's a different stem.
Yeah. Okay.
We're trying to figure out what that stem is prior to its accompanying with the tense formative.
That just takes study and time, and really, the more you see it, the more you begin to recognize it. There's some I just know, Erkamai and Elthin, um,
It's just kind of one of those
Lambano
things
or
that,
Balo with the double lambda versus the single lambda. Those things become almost common. So for this stage of our learning, we're really just trying to see what occurs, and over time you begin to recognize some more so than others. There's always going to be some, unless you spend a lot of time. There's always some that just like, I don't know what that word is. I can't find it, and I'll cheat and use the computer. So and then I go, oh, okay, I see what happened. And I write down what happened here, and I'll try to find the root word. And once I find the root word, I can figure it out.
yeah.
So this goes back to okay, it's starting to make sense. So we do have to do some math to figure it out if it's not clear in the text or in the book. And then the slide earlier about the root equaling the stem, that confused me because there are two different things on the test. And so now I understand what you mean by that slide.
Okay.
But yeah, still, like, I guess in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, we're being tested on it, but I'm trying to understand it, and I don't. Like, if I were given any of these words here, how would I figure it out? What is
Well,
there?
like we just walked through.
Yeah.
Basically, the key is you do have to sort of understand and know what the root word or the stem is, and it's like vocab. You got to know your vocab is the bottom line. And if you know the vocabulary word, then you'll know. If you know the lexical form,
Mm-hmm.
right? The lexical form, lambano.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's my present active indicative. That's the lexical form.
Right.
I know it has, its root is lambda alpha bait, not lambda alpha mu bait.
Mm-hmm.
Balo, the bait alpha lambda lambda omega. That's the lexical form. That's the present active indicative. But I
Right.
know its root is bait alpha lambda, and not the double lambda. Those things just kind of come with using it and knowing it.
Yeah.
So there's some words that you kind of really get comfortable with, and others you just struggle.
And how do you know for those words that look different, how to do the math to, figure out what the stem is apart from the tense formative?
Well, you start with number one. You can separate the parts, right?
Right.
If you believe there's an augment, if the augment got linked in, if it's an eta or if it's an epsilon, take the epsilon off. And if it's lengthened, then take that eta and make it an epsilon because it's probably part of the word, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
maybe a diphthong. So you start by doing that. Then you know the personal endings. We'll take the personal ending off. And then you can look, okay, what do I got left? Is that ending, is that a connecting vowel or is that a tense formative that's left at the end there? And you start piecing the thing together and say, what do I got left? And you try to say, okay, is that what's left recognizable as a root or stem some way? And you try to find the present active indicative form of that.
Right.
And basically, you just take it apart.
So that's what he was wanting us to do here.
I don't know.
I'm genuinely, I don't know. Like I don't know if Sam had the same. It feels like me and Sam were asking the same thing.
I feel
I
like
think
I'm giving the same answer.
ultimately,
You
I
have
think
to
it
dissect
ultimately
the
comes
pieces.
down to with once we use more and more and get used to it, we're gonna see, kind of what's going on, I
If you could
guess.
dissect the pieces, if you could see the dissect it and put it in its little pieces, then it's a matter of understanding your vocab and whether or not it's recognizable. And this is where Mouse is correct. If we kind of learn the roots and the stem, he recommends that we learn the roots, and it does make sense. It's more effort, it's more work, but everywhere in his vocab, he recommends learning the root because that will be your clue. If it has two different stems, for the present tense versus the aorist that uses a different stem, you'll know that. Or if it's using the same stem. Lu is the same stem in the present and in the aorist and in the future. It's the same in all three of those. So, it makes their life easy. Some of them aren't.
I mean, maybe I don't know
Just
if
I would
that
always take it.
we-
I would always break it into pieces and try to understand which the pieces are, and then basically it's like taking a puzzle. It's like looking at a puzzle for the backside of a puzzle, breaking it apart to figure out what it is.
right,
Well,
and
it's
that's
like
what I
when
was
I see
getting
the
at for
Ada
the
at the beginning. When I see the Ada at the beginning, I'm now thinking, okay, this has been lengthened.
right.
What's going on here?
That's a real
So
possibility. Exactly right.
yeah,
It may not be a fact, but it's a real possibility. So that's one of your clues. Oh, this eta, could that be a lengthened epsilon or a lengthened diphthong? Uh,
yeah.
well, that's a possibility, and that's a clue. Then you start with your personal endings. Well, if it's using the secondary personal endings and not the primary, there's a major clue because that's got to be an imperfect or an aorist if you're using, well, I say got to be. There are exceptions, but overwhelmingly, it's if you use the secondary personal endings. That's why I say break it into pieces. If you're using the secondary personal endings, it's probably an aorist or a imperfect verb. Now, which one is it? Well, you kind of break the rest of it apart. Is there a liquid verb in the liquid consonant there? Lambda mu nu rho in the stem ending. Oh, look, there's a nu. Oh, well, that tells me most likely this could be an aorist, and they didn't use the sigma alpha. Instead, they used just the alpha kind of thing. You start figuring the little pieces out by breaking it apart. And once you break it apart, once you dissect the pieces, that leaves you with nothing but the root and the stem. And you may or may not, you'll get closer to it with that, in other words.
So for sake of the test, maybe we can get Damien to run us through some examples. I know you have more stuff to get through today,
Yeah.
but that
All right, I'll talk to Damien about going through some stuff. Let me move on, okay? Because I
okay.
want to show you some. All right, now that we really kind of confused you, I want to bring out some more depth, okay? We talk about aorist. Aorist is the complete picture, the undefined event. It's just a statement of fact, all right? But you can have nuances or associated with it. There's a few of them, the top three, a constitutive aorist. Now, I bring this out because, one, I think you guys have enough knowledge you can grasp this. All right, so the constitutive aorist presents the action as a whole without regarding to its beginning or end, right? Or the length of time. That's what we normally talk about. Death reigned from Adam to Moses. Well, just a fact. Death reigned from Adam to Moses. There's no, it's extended over a long period of time, but there's no detail or definition about the reigning act itself. It just did. And so that's called a constitutive error. That's what we've been doing, right? We've been doing a constitutive error, the undefined, the completed whole, the big picture, constitutive errors. That's what that is, all right? You already know that. Now we gave a different name to it, all right? Now there's what's called the inceptive aorist. The inceptive means beginning, right? Now this translation is a very bad translation. I don't agree with it, but I understand what they did. Because the inceptive aorist is, again, it's a stated fact or beginning. Jesus wept. If you look at almost all the translations, they say Jesus wept. But some will say, well, it's an inceptive. In other words, they'll emphasize moving into the beginning of that state of being or the beginning of the action. They'll put the emphasis on the beginning of it, even though it's not time related. Jesus began to weep. That's a really you have to make an assertion that the emphasis on Jesus wept is about he began weeping. John 11 verse 35. The aorist form communicates the inceptive of the state, the inception of the state. Words like began or came to, and I'm going to show you if we get time, we've got a few more minutes I want to actually go to John 11:35 in a minute, but let me finish this. So constitutive aorist means it's just the aorist we've been talking about, right? The undefined, the big picture, the whole statement of fact. That's all it is, nothing more. Inceptive aorist means it's still a statement of fact. It's still the big picture, nothing more. But maybe the translator wants to put some emphasis on the beginning of the event or the of the statement of fact. And so, in this particular translation, I think it's a very bad translation. But this author, I don't know who did it, wants to put he began to weep, but really, dakrusen means wept, nothing more than that. That's the aorist form, and nothing more than he wept. Then there's a third one called an epistolary aorist, right? In an epistle, so the author writes from the perspective of the reader's past. I know you're not going to get all this. I'm just introducing it. We can do it more later. The author writes the letter from the perspective of the reader's past perspective. Although he's currently writing the letter, right? And almost always you see with the words grapho, I write, or pimpo, I bring. Pimpos I bring? Yeah, I think so. For example, in Ephesians 6, verse 22, I have sent him or Tychicus to you. Well, at that particular moment when he's writing, I sent to him, he hadn't sent him. He's still right there. But he's writing as if it's already done because from the reader's perspective, it will have been done. So he's writing from the reader's perspective, not from his own. That's the difference. And that's what epistolary aorist is doing. He's going to write this aorist, this completed, the statement of fact, but he's going to write it from the perspective of the reader, not the speaker. That's the difference. Okay? Only added two things, so let's not freak out. Okay? The constitutive aorist, just another name for what we've been doing. The inceptive aorist, it's an aorist, but it puts some emphasis on the beginning or moving into the beginning or the state versus the epistolary aorist. We always talk about where the writer is writing from his perspective, but an epistolary aorist is going to write from his reader's perspective. That's the big difference. All right, so I want to introduce those things because I want us to dive a little deeper in our translation as we begin to move forward and pretty soon into reading. And I want to bring out something else real quick. Let me go ahead and move to here. Okay, so if we go to, let's do that. Let's go to, what was it, John 11, 35. All right, you see our translation, and I learned how to write on here, by the way. Not that it really matters. Right there, drawn screen. Okay, so here's our word, edakrusen. Right? If I were to hover over it, well, let me hover it. Well, I don't know if it will since I wrote it. I guess not. Let me delete it.
How you doing that? You're gonna have to show me how you wrote in logos.
So if you go down in, let me get out of it right here in exit drawing. You go down here to the more, the three little arrows at the bottom, right? And you come up here, and it says draw on screen. Boom.
Does it save it?
Huh? I don't think so. No, because when you leave, you have to exit from the top. These little three dots up here.
Okay.
We got the three lines at the bottom, and the three dots up here. You could save to photos, though. You copy that image because basically what you did is you just created a screenshot.
Oh, okay.
You can't scroll or anything. You're on a screenshot, and you can write it as a screen. Save it to a note, share it, save to a photo. So if you write something you want to save it, that's how you do it, or you just exit the drawing, right?
So
anyway, so here's our.
Sorry to go off on that.
Yeah, it's not on the desktop version. I don't think. Doesn't look like it is.
I don't know for a fact. I didn't look at that. So here's our word for edakrusen. So here we have the. I don't know, can I draw while that's open? Well, I can't. Once I do that, I lose it. All right, too bad. So there's some limitations, I guess. So you see the lemma, the lexical form is dakruo. And it means to weep. And this is the aorist active indicative third person singular. And so we go to, let's get out of there. Now notice that you see Jesus wept. But if I go to, let me find this real quick. I go to tools and I go to text comparison and I look at select a passage, John 11, dot 35, 35. Okay, the New American Standard Bible, Jesus wept. ESV, Jesus wept. New King James, Jesus wept. New NIV, Jesus wept. NLT, then Jesus wept. New, I think Christian version, Jesus cried. God's Word Bible, Jesus cried. Holman Christian Standard, Jesus wept. New King, Jesus wept. LAB, Jesus wept. And I'm pretty sure the Message has something like then. It doesn't use then, but something like then Jesus wept. So it puts the emphasis. It instead of it tries to give in the context of the event when Lazarus died. All it says is that Jesus wept. But the translator in this case wants to put some kind of emphasis because of Lazarus' death. Then he cried, he wept, or he began to weep, something of that nature. So that's a translator decision, and I think it's you can do that, but you see most won't do that here. So when we're talking about an inceptive aorist, inceptive aorist means I'm going to put the emphasis on entering into that state or entering into that action, action being weeping or to weep. And that's why the NLT says, then Jesus wept. So I just want to kind of highlight that. And there's some other things we could bring in as we go further. But that's just sort of an introduction. And so understand that, yeah, the aorist is the undefined big picture event. That's a constitutive aorist, it's called. You can have an inceptive where you put emphasis on the beginning. And you can have what's called an epistolatory aorist, which means instead of from the speaker's perspective in the aorist, he's writing from the reader's perspective, and it's going to write as if it's already done, even though it's not. Okay?
Okay. So it's like a concept. I didn't find it in the book. It may be in there, but it's just describing, whether it's inceptive or, the third one that you mentioned.
Epistolatory.
Epistolatory. Okay. Yeah, I'm familiar with that. Okay. It hasn't happened yet, but he said it as if it happened because of the readers.
Right.
Okay,
And this is not in the book. This is a step further. Okay. As I mentioned to you before, we want to kind of get the grammar basic down, and I want us to move a little bit further just to give you a little more depth and tools, hopefully not to create confusion. But if I think you kind of get it, and I do think you get it, you're struggling with, okay, how do I recognize it and that kind of stuff, but I think you get it. So this is like okay, now when I'm starting translating, whether I'm talking to first or second aorist makes no difference. Translation is still going to be an undefined, perfective kind of action, but there can be some nuances associated with that perfective, completed, whole, undefined action, like an epistolatory or an inceptive, and there's some others, but those are the common ones. So I just want to start introducing some of this stuff as we move forward. That's it.
Had some. I'll save it for another day.
Yeah, one thing at a time. It's just an introduction, okay?
Okay.
So again, I'm not. Yeah, I don't know. We'll figure.
Yeah, let me ask this because I know our time's we're gonna have another class soon. For the sake of the test, you want me to just send that column like blank or with the tense formative?
Yeah, I want you to answer it best you can.
I get it. Okay. I don't. Yeah. Okay.
I don't want you to just. Yeah, I know it's a struggle. I don't want you to just skip over it and like, okay. But if you put some effort into it and you really don't get it, okay, then you did the best you can.
Yeah. I'm just trying to learn how to. I guess what I'm saying is I don't know how to do it. Like I know how to do it. Like I know the tense formative, and I know.
You know how to do it, but don't know how to do it.
Yeah. Like so, the stem is different, and the stem is what we're trying to find. But it's because the stem is different that I don't know what the stem is, so that I can figure out how it matched. Right. So you take
I understand exactly what you're saying. You don't know where to go because the stem is different. I can't figure this out. And there's the only way you know it is by learning the vocabulary and the roots. And
for some words that
it's very, very hard. Yeah, I agree. But once you see it, you go like, oh man, okay. Or you're like, oh, I never would have got that, you know? And that's just the way it is for me. I said, I never would have got that. Okay, I'm never going to get it. How important is it to me that I actually get that that's the stem in this instance, and then this is the stem for present versus the first aorist or second aorist. How important is it to me? It's going to depend on how much effort I put into it. To learn the roots and the stems and the vocab. That's really what it boils down to. It's like any language.
And
how much effort.
And I'm there with you.
And I don't put that much effort. Truly, my vocab is weak. That's a fact. Some words I'm really comfortable with. I've seen them a lot, but it's really how much effort you put in vocab and understanding roots and stems associated with vocab.
Yes, but how do we know we know it's different and we know that's what it is, but I guess I'm asking, can we do an example? Because I don't know if we've done it. I don't know if we've tried to do this here because I don't know.
I don't have time now, but we'll look at it later.
It might be something that we bring up.
We'll have Damien look at something on Friday for you.
Yeah, it might be something to bring up with Damien and Andreas and see if they can't.
Because we only got 5 minutes time.
Text them and ask them. We'll text them and ask them, Jake, and be like, "Hey, can you help us understand this part?"
Okay.
All right. Well, I'm gonna. I think that'll help.
All right, guys, let's close it out here, and then I'll talk to Damien about for Friday, and try to have something, maybe pull something off the test or something or similar that you can sort of follow, and you can stump him and Andres.
Sounds good.
All right, sounds good, guys.
All right, thank you.
All right, bye.
Thanks, Dave.
Bye.